Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Flex Train, a flexible training opportunity brought to you by Johnstone Supply. So, as we were talking about moving into 2020, we're going to start focusing in January and February on universal parts. And Rachel was so kind to get the entire first 6 months of 2020 posted on the Johnstone Solutions website. So, when we get done with the class, I'll show you where that's at in case you want to see what the topics are for each week. And so we're going to start with universal gas valves. So here at Johnstone Supply, we keep a variety of universal parts because that was one of the things that I kept an abundance of when I was out in the field. Universal parts can save us a lot of downtime and a lot of travel time, window time, and that's one of the things that Greg and I will be focusing on in our Service Manager Prep course, which is going to be a 2 or 3 day workshop. Is talking about how universal parts can save a significant amount of downtime. So this is just a shot from our Indianapolis South location. Just a variety of gas valves that we keep in the showroom. Now we do have more of them in the warehouse, but this is what we actually keep in the showroom. And quite a few of these are universal gas valves, and not everybody understands what a universal gas valve will replace. So we've got to break it down into what our application is, whether we've got a standing pilot, whether we have an electronic ignition, what our actual circumstance is. Because a lot of these gas valves that we have will replace an abundance of gas valves that are in the field. A lot of times we go back with the OEM specific gas valve, but really, if we think about it, what is a gas valve? It's an electrically operated solenoid, right? So as long as we're not talking about a modulating gas valve, we're talking about a single stage or a 2-stage, and we're talking about standing pilot, or we're talking about electronic ignition. So if we can just focus around what our application is, we should have no problem finding a gas valve that will do the specific job that we need to do. Because the only real differences in gas valves are how those solenoids open. Some of them are slightly delayed, and some of them are instantaneous. But when it comes to functionality, most of those are going to be just on a slight delay as it's opening, just so we have a soft ignition instead of a hard ignition. So most manufacturers have incorporated some type of a slow open feature on their gas valve just to help eliminate hard starting. So let's just look at a few of the universal gas valves that we stock here at Johnstone Supply. So our most common gas valve on the shelf, if we're talking about an electronic ignition gas valve, is the Honeywell VR 8345M. So that has a MVPV and then the MVPV, which is your common. So we have a pilot valve and we have a main valve. So depending on our application, we've already got all of our capabilities to use this on a pilot operated system or a direct operated system. We just simply have to decide which one we're going to use. So we can run up to from 30 to 415 on our natural gas. And if we look at the actual component itself, so we're going to open the box out on this. As soon as we open up, we're going to have our instructions and everything. Here's everything that's in the box on this. So we've got our gas valve, we've got our little jumper harness. So if we have a non-piloted system, then we just simply want to open our pilot valve and our main valve at the same time. So we use this factory supplied harness that just plugs into the gas valve, and it jumpers MV and PV. This gas valve comes with 3/4 inch inlet and outlet fittings. So if you have the same size Honeywell valve in 1/2 inch, it is going to end up being about 1/2 of an inch longer, because we're going to insert a bushing on each side, and we're going to gain another 1/4 of an inch or so of distance on each end. But we can use this gas valve to operate 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch pieces of equipment. So, we're talking hundreds of thousands of BTUs that we can actually operate with this thing. So I used to keep this gas valve on my van because I didn't know if I was working on a residential, on a commercial application. I could have a 300,000 BTU boiler, and if it had a 3/4 in, 3/4 out gas valve on it, I had one on my van. If I was working on a 50,000 BTU furnace that had a 1/2 inch in, 1/2 inch out, I had that gas valve on my van. All I had to do was just simply set it up for what I was using. So it does come with the 1/4 inch, a new 1/4 inch pilot tube ferrule kit so that we can make sure that we have good clean threads going on to our pilot tube when we're installing this on a pilot operated system. It comes with some new electrical spade terminals if we need those, and it comes with the LP gas conversion kit. So a lot of the gas valves that we stock, if you're ordering an OEM gas valve, it's probably not going to be LP. You're going to have to order the LP conversion kit for it, or you're going to have to order an LP specific gas valve. So the beauty of having a universal gas valve on your van is that it has the LP gas conversion kit in it already. So this valve is going to be used for natural gas or for LP. If we're going to convert these gas valves over to LP, we actually have a spring and a new cap that comes in that kit. If we look at that kit there, let me see if I can zoom in on that just a little bit for you. So if we look at the actual LP kit itself, we're going to notice that it's got a spring, it has a seating cap, and then it has a top cover cap. And then it also has the stickers that go along with it to put on the gas valve and on the appliance itself, and just so that the next person knows that it has been converted over to LP. So that is already in our package. So to convert that thing, we're actually just going to take out the factory aluminum cover. It's going to be replaced with the black cover when we're done, just so we know that something has changed. So we're going to remove that aluminum cover. Inside is that lower retention cap, and that's what's actually holding the spring or putting tension against that spring. And when we adjust our manifold pressure, we're going to be adjusting it up from here. We're simply going to put our screwdriver in, and we're going to adjust that to set the manifold pressure. So we take that out and we put in the new one, and we have an LP converted gas valve. Right here is the, it has a plug in the pilot portion of this gas valve. So from the factory, right out of the box, this valve is set up for a direct ignition, non-piloted. If we want to use this on a piloted gas system, then we simply take this plug out, and we now attach our pilot right there where that sticker is at. We've got a ground connection for right here. We have taps so that we can check our gas pressure. Grab my Sharpie. So we can actually check our pressure on the inlet of the gas valve and on our manifold as well. Right there is that spot where we actually remove the plug and insert our pilot tube if we're going to have a pilot system. Move on to the next screen. Okay, so what all gas valves can this replace? Well, this is right out of the installation manual for this particular gas valve, and you'll find that it replaces most Honeywell valves that have been on the market, and it also has some direct replacements for some White Rogers and some Robert Shaw gas valves. So Honeywell is actually showing other manufacturers that they are a direct replacement for. And that's the third page that has some additional Honeywell gas valves that this thing replaces. If we look at the wiring diagram that comes with this valve, we're going to see that depending on our operation, if we are using an intermittent ignition system that does have a pilot on it, so we're talking about this particular one is it's a spark to pilot. So we have a spark to pilot system that's got a pilot assembly attached to our burner, to a manifold, and we are going to open up that pilot off from our PV, and then we're also going to open up the main gas supply off from MV. So we're simply going to use the MV, the PV, and that MV/PV. And looking at that wiring diagram, there is actually a manufacturer's error. Anybody see it? Just noticed that. That should actually be labeled PV, because that actually follows over here and attaches to the PV. So we have an MV, a PV, and an MV/PV, which is your common. So that particular installation manual has an error in it. I have to make a note of that and see if I can send that off to Honeywell. So that is if we are using a pilot operated system. If that is a non-pilot operated system, if that is a direct ignition, we are going to simply use our factory harness, and we're going to connect it so that it will jumper MV and PV. And now we're just going to be going back to, this says valve, that would actually be MV. And then we're going to go to our MV PV, which is going to be our ground, our neutral. So we are just supplying 24 volts to our combination gas valve. So here is that is a flame sensor. So this is actually probably an industrial piece of equipment that is a direct ignition. So it's a hot surface igniter, and then it has a separate flame sensor on it. So one valve that we can use for a variety of applications. Oh, what happened there? Okay, so that is the VR8345M that will go up to 300,000 BTUs. They're showing 1,000 BTUs per cubic foot. This has a capacity of up to 300 cubic foot, so it'd be a 300,000 BTU. 3/4 in, 3/4 out, standard opening, straight through design, has a current draw of 0.7 amps. Now, if we move on to some of our other brands, because not only do we carry Honeywell universal valves, we carry some of our the White Rogers and Emerson valves. So if we look at the 36CO3300, so this is a universal combination gas valve. It is a single stage fast opening, and it is for standing pilot. So here on the top of the screen, it shows all of the OEM valves that it replaces. If we look at what's inside, same thing. We're going to find us a gas valve. We're going to find an LP kit over here on the right hand side. This particular one only has a 1/2 inch on one side and a 3/4 on the other. So we have a 3/4 inch bushing that comes with it. We have a single jumper wire, and then we have our instruction manual. So if we look at that, so this particular system on a 1/2 by 3/4 is going to handle 230,000 BTU. So on natural gas, it's between 30 and 290 is its actual completed range. We also carry a 36H33412, and so that is a single stage that is going to be for electronic ignition. So this would be for hot surface ignition or direct spark. This particular valve replaces all of those part numbers there. When we open up, we're going to see a typical White Rogers valve. We do have, let me grab my Sharpie again. We do have our conversion spot so that we would remove this for our LP kit and put our new spring and retention seat inside of it, just like the Honeywell converts. Now, if we're talking about the pilot, I should have showed that on the Honeywell valve, but we also have a pilot adjust. So if we need to control the amount of fuel that's going to that pilot assembly, because remember, with the universal valve, we don't know exactly what orifice is going to be on that pilot assembly. So we actually have the opportunity to adjust the pressure that is going to that pilot so that we can manipulate the flame to get it the correct height that we need for our application. So we have that. I did not have a picture of the box. Actually, I took pictures of these over at Indy South yesterday, and I thought that I'd taken one of the box. We have another White Rogers Emerson valve that is a 2-stage. So, we're starting to see a lot more of our 2-stage equipments. If we're talking about any of the equipment that we sell here at Johnstone, once we get into 96%, we're going to be a 2-stage furnace. We actually, now before we went to 96s, we had 95s that were 2 stages. So through the 90s and into the early 2000s, there were 95%ers that were 2-stage operated. It's just a 2-stage gas valve. So there's no reason that we would have to have an OEM gas valve on a standard 2-stage furnace. We can keep a universal 2-stage gas valve on our van. And so with that, we have our low stage, we have our high stage, we have our pilot adjust, and we have our pilot assembly. If it happens to have a pilot ignition system on it, we have the option of putting our pilot on. And we have the vent connection, because a lot of those high efficiency furnaces has the vent tube that ties back onto the burner box. So we actually have that fitting on there as well. If we look at that particular gas valve, oh, come here. Let me blow that up. If we look at that, that just shows us where our single stage and our 2-stage functions are. So here is our, if we're using it on a single, because that's the nice thing about it. I can actually use this valve as a single stage valve if I wanted to. So it can be used as single or two stage. I can keep this one valve on my van and replace pretty much every valve that I'm going to run into, except for modulating. So here is my high stage, and here is my low stage if I'm using it as a two-stage setup. So that would be the accompanying spring and adjust screw if I was converting that to LP. Here is our pilot adjustment, and here is if we were going to run a pilot tube. And we also have outlet pressure taps. So there's our manifold pressure. We actually have one for the incoming on the opposite side of that. So very, very handy valve. I'll get the part number for that here in just a second. I thought for sure I had a picture of that on this. If we look at wiring for that thing, very much like with our Honeywell, we have our common, our pilot and our main. If we're talking about a two-stage, we now have our pilot and main as stage one, and our stage two shows it on C. So it would not function on a two-stage with a pilot, but it would work on a single stage with a pilot. And all right, get out of here. Come on now. There we go. Get out of there. Now, if we talk about universal kits, we also carry a Honeywell Y8610U, which is a intermittent pilot ignition kit. So if we have an existing standing pilot operated system, say we've got a hanging furnace, or say we've got an older furnace that we just want to convert, we've got our intermittent pilot ignition kit. Or if we have a intermittent pilot system that is not functioning properly. I used to run into a lot of commercial equipment that would lose an ignition module and have an oddball ignition module on it. Well, I could simply kept this at the shop. I didn't keep this on my van, but I kept it at the shop. So I could do a conversion of that appliance with an intermittent pilot ignition kit. I have used this kit on pizza ovens, on boilers, on hanging furnaces. It's been an incredible kit to have around if you're working on a variety of unusual equipment. And I did. I never knew exactly what I was going to run into. So that was one that I kept at my shop at all times because it was just a handy piece to have. If you are a company that actually works on gas fireplaces, Robert Shaw, I do not stock this one, but I could get it if you ever needed one. Robert Shaw actually manufactures a universal fireplace. This would be a millivolt operated gas valve, which most fireplaces use a millivolt operated gas valve. And they have this UMVK-NP, which is a universal fireplace gas valve kit. Notice the thing even comes with some stone for putting around the valve so you can try to hide some of your components. So a lot of universal access to gas valves when it comes to the HVAC industry, and not everybody knows that these parts are available to them. So I'm going to go back to our beginning, start with that Honeywell. And anybody got any questions or comments that they want to bring up about universal gas valves? Okay, I do have one message that came through. It says, what about different opening valves, slow, step, and fast? So that is one of the things that you'll encounter is, some manufacturers have a specific adjustment that they want between the opening rates, particularly on a two-stage furnace, the opening between low fire and high fire. And then some also want a slow open on the movement from pilot over to main. And that's where I'll tell you that they're not 100% exact replacements. That's why I always recommend to take a look to see what valves they recommend replacing. If I look at that Honeywell 8345, here is a list of all of the valves that it considers itself to be a direct replacement for. So there's a lot of valves that are not going to come up as a direct replacement, but should be a close replacement. So you definitely want to verify that when we're looking at universal valves. Anybody else?
Actually, Cliff, that was our rule in the field, was that it had to be listed as a replacement valve for that particular valve because it's been UL tested for that application.
That's exactly right. That's why every one of these comes with a list of valves that it says is a direct replacement for. So even on these White Rogers Emerson valves, it's right on the box. Replaces the following models. So it is a direct replacement for these models. Doesn't mean it's going to replace every model of gas valve out there, but it's going to replace a significant amount. If I go over to the 33412 as a direct replacement for all of these White Rogers, you notice with the White Rogers, they're pretty well listing their valves. Honeywell had a few. If we go back to that Honeywell installation manual, there were a few that it says it is a direct replacement for. But primarily they're just looking at their own valves because they have all of the tested data for their own valves. They just happen to grab a few of the common White Rogers and Robert Shaw valves and went, oh, you know what? We match up directly with the OEM specs for these valves, so we're going to list those as well. So you may not, when you open this system up, open this package up and you don't find that the current valve that you have is on your list, you may have a difference of opening characteristics, because that's really about the only thing that you're going to find. Is the difference is going to be in the timing of opening our solenoids. So it is absolutely recommended that you look at the box, you look at the installation manual, and see if your valve is a direct replacement for that. What else we got, guys?
You know the old rule of thumb?
What's it?
First of all, we only change a valve if it was listed, like to your point. But in the old days, it was kind of, if there's an in-shot or an up-shot burner, you need a step open valve. If it's ribbon burners, they'll usually light with a fast open valve.
That's
so
correct.
The characteristics are exactly what you say, though. It's just about a delayed ignition.
Mm-hmm.
And you might,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, you may want to make a note about if a lot of the gas valves on the side of them are listed for half-pound max pressure.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys don't realize that, and we use water column for our gas pressure readings. So just try to keep in mind that a half inch is about 14 inches water column. So
that's a great point. Absolutely.
More important probably when you're dealing with propane converted.
Yep.
Because these have propane wants you to have 13 inches coming in. So you're right at the max that gas valve is going to be responsible for. So just be careful out there. And anytime you change a gas valve, universal gas valves were big in my service department back in the day. But they were required, obviously, to check the manifold pressure once they changed the gas valve and put it within the specs of the piece of equipment. And I might make another addition to that. Being in the Midwest, we have some gas pressure issues sometimes.
Right.
And a lot of guys will shut the gas off, put their inlet tap in there, open the gas valve, or open the gas cock and decide whether they have adequate pressure. They need to leave that on the inlet and fire the valve, and maybe any other gas-fired appliances in the residence, and see if that water column drops, because it may not be a pressure problem, it may be a volume problem. So
absolutely, because that's something that doesn't get recognized very often is, especially with LP, you can have a regulator that will be supplying proper inlet pressure until other devices open up. You got to remember, a pressure regulator is just a diaphragm that's operated by a spring. So if we have a failure of the tension on that spring, I could have proper incoming gas pressure, but not have a drop on that until I have other appliances fire up along with it. So I always have guys, before they condemn a gas valve, verify that we actually have consistent pressure on our inlet, because if we have a change on our gas pressure on the outlet, that could be due to our valve, but let's make sure that it's not because we have a drop of inlet pressure, because LP regulators particularly are notorious for getting moisture inside of the regulator outdoors and may allow enough volume, enough pressure at a stable state, but once we have other appliances turned on, we'll lose capacity, we'll lose velocity of that LP. And so, if we see that I have you know, 3.5 inches of pressure on a natural gas system as soon as it lights, but then it immediately drops down to 2 and it's not sufficient for combustion. Well, I have to go and check the incoming pressure as well to make sure that my pressure hasn't dropped. Definitely on LP, but I've seen it on natural as well. Anybody else? Okay, guys. Well, I thank you everybody for their time, and look forward to an exciting year of Flex Train, and we'll see you guys next Thursday. Everybody have a safe day.
Thank
Take
you.
care.